But thank you all for coming. I'm a little nervous. I haven't done an in-person introduction in a long time, so I'm used to staring at the screen. So stay with me. Thank you all. We're so happy to have Lily King here tonight. I'm such a huge fan. I'm going to forego the biography and tell a story about how we met. It's not funny or exciting. It's very true. So about 2 years ago, Lily's new book was going to come out, Writers and Lovers. I received an early copy to read, and I met Lily at a conference in Cleveland. Her publisher was nice enough to take a bunch of booksellers out and 2 other writers. And if you're a bookseller worth your salt, you know who Lily King is, right? And everyone wanted a piece of her. Towards the end of the night, I finally got a chance to sit down and talk with Lily, and I'm such a huge fan of the book. And we talked, and she was so charming and funny, and just an incredible person to speak to. And we had a couple glasses of wine. It was one of those nights at a bookseller conference, and I knew right away I wanted to host her for an event. And I just opened Madison Street Books. We were opening a store. We were going to open in the following spring, and I cornered Judy Hodgson, your publisher, and she said, "Yes, we'll make it happen." So I get the event. We're going to host it in the store. COVID hit, and so we ended up hosting one of our very early virtual events, which was great. You were in conversation with Brock Clark and our own Beth Golay. It was a really wonderful event, but I just wished I could have hosted her in person. So move forward. I opened a new bookstore, and with Kristen, my business partner back there, and I get an early draft of Lily's new short story collection, 5 Tuesdays in Winter, which you guys all have a copy of. And I was so excited, read it, and I thought there's no way they're going to give me another shot at this. But I get the call, and they asked me this time if I'd like to host Lily King. And I just seen a bachelor, the publicist, wonderful woman. I immediately wrote back and I get, are you really, this is what I'm hearing in person, blah, blah, blah. And so, roundabout way of saying, I finally get to host Lily King in the historic Fine Arts Building in Curtis Hall on the 10th floor with the most, if you guys get a chance, take a look at the view. And I am so happy. I'm so happy to have you. We're so happy. And as a bonus, Rebecca Makkai answered the call without hesitation to come and be in conversation with Lily. We're glad the dates worked out. So you guys are in for a treat tonight. I told you it wasn't funny or exciting, but it is true. I think that's how I remember it. I don't know how you remember it.
I remember completely different.
But once again, thank you all for coming out. Thank you guys for both being here. And you guys are in for a treat. Enjoy the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome to Chicago.
Oh, thank you.
All of our ceilings are this fancy. It's really are what we're known for. I'm so excited to talk about this book. I know that some people in the audience probably have read all of it or some of it, and some people it's coming to them fresh, and I think no spoilers on the endings of stories particularly. But actually the first question I want to ask you, and we can be as cryptic as we want to be, because one of the things I'm dying to know about this is that it is almost impossible, in my opinion, to give a short story a happy ending. And might out of the gutter. It can be done really well. I can think of a couple of Alice Munro stories that I think have brilliant endings. I can think of a Priscilla Everett story that has a really, but like, it's really hard to pull off. And it's hard to pull off any ending that's not like someone staring out the window, right, in a short story. But you have a couple in here, particularly the title story. I'm not giving anything away. Everyone forget that I said that if you haven't read it yet. But even those ones like When in Dordogne, which like there's sort of a note of optimism, even ones like the opening story where I was so scared for so long and then was like, oh, okay. So this is going to be sort of a very simplistic question after all that of how have you pulled that off? Because that is not something that a lot of writers find intuitive or easy. I think the reason that people don't end short stories on an upbeat note or a note of hope is not because they're not hopeful people. Because those same writers, when they write a novel, might give it a really hopeful ending. But I think it's because of the technical difficulties of doing that in such a short form. So how the hell did you do that is my question.
I can't say it's anything that I do consciously. You know, I don't set out thinking I'm just gonna, you know, make my readers happy at the end. I don't. I for Creature, all I had was this 14-year-old girl going to the mansion in her town to babysit for 2 weeks, and I had no idea what was going to happen in there. And I just kind of, you know, felt my way. It's funny, I am starting to get a reputation as somebody like who writes happy endings because of Writers and Lovers, and and so no, in my entire career, no one has ever asked me, now what about these happy endings when this is starting to happen? You know, which is funny. It's a funny thing. I mean, you think of Euphoria and how that ends. People were really angry. I mean, there was almost like a riot in one book. Oh my God. So, but it is funny how the short story form has kind of has sort of a formulaic arc in a way.
It can.
Kind of tonal, you know, and there's a lot of really good stories that have that sort of tonal arc. And I do think I like to play around with that. And you know, I am a sucker for a rom-com. And I feel like, you know, 5 Tuesdays in Winter is about as feel good as I get, you know, and I did need that story to have that ending. And I guess I kind of feel like right now, it's a little more devastating right now to be playing around with a sad ending. You know, it's like, I need to give this to myself to get through these years. You know?
What's also, I think, in the stories that I, you know, in Creature, in 5 Tuesdays in Winter, in the Dordogne, you know, you've put these characters through a lot, which I think is part of it. You know, it's not like all ponies the whole time, and then, you know, there's really been a journey through the Inferno. I mean,
I definitely feel like you have to earn it, and I mean, I say that with a lot of my novels. I feel like I really put them through hell. And then I can give them things. You know?
And that said, they don't all. And so now, those of you who haven't read it yet, you're not going to remember which ones we said had happy endings. So, because some of them have very bleak endings. Or not bleak, but like, you know, there are others that, you know, you definitely don't feel as optimistic about the characters in the closing moments, right? So it's not, so you don't know which. You have to find out. So I want to talk to you about your short story career. You know, I think that for so many of us, we get known more broadly for novels when we are equally devoted to the short story. Maybe I started with the short story. I found it very funny. So my short story collection was my 3rd book after 2 novels, and I had been publishing short stories and writing short stories before any novel came out. And I would get these questions in interviews. Why did you suddenly decide to stop writing novels and suddenly start writing short stories? This book is basically the product of 14 years of, you know, stuff. So can you talk us through, like, I don't want to say if you left the novels out of your career because they're beautiful novels, that would be a terrible thing to do, but can you talk us through like the short story only version of your career? When did you start writing short stories? Was it school? Was it after? If we just pulled that one thread out of your career, what would it look like?
It would look like, I think 10th grade was my first short story. And then when I handed in when the teacher handed that story back, he told me that he taught a creative writing class. I think the fall semester of junior year and senior year. And he's like, I think you should take it.
Nice. Oh.
Because honestly, it was, I already knew. I mean, I just knew it was the only thing I was interested in. And so and we had this amazing class where we had to have a 3.5-page short story on his desk every Monday morning.
Wow,
You know, for the entire semester, every Monday morning. So every Sunday afternoon, I was just frantically writing a 3.5-page short story. It had to have a beginning, middle, and end. You know.
Yeah.
And 3.5 pages back then was like, you know, how am I going to get to 3.5? And so, and he had gone to Stanford. He had taken creative writing classes, and so he was really up to date in how to teach the short story and how to teach fiction. I learned so much, and we all read each other. Every single class was a workshop, and we had to read them all before we came to class, and we had to comment on 3 each week. And and you know, when I was a junior, the seniors just trashed my first 2 stories. I mean, they made so much fun of it. I mean, basically it was Little House on the Prairie. The first one was Little House on the Prairie. The second one was The Partridge Family. I watched a lot of TV, and it took me a long time to get over TV as a source.
Yeah.
And so by the time I got to college and started taking creative writing classes, I'd already written a lot of stories. But I took, you know, I was an English major, and I got I think it was like I did a little honors program or something in creative writing, and then eventually I went to grad school, because I kind of, after I graduated from college, I didn't have any discipline.
Yeah.
And
That's a familiar story.
so I flailed around for a while, and then I heard about graduate school. I literally didn't know about graduate school. I just didn't.
Yeah.
And then I heard you could, you know, study creative writing in graduate school. And then I heard about these scholarships that you could get and all kinds of things. So that was very exciting. I did that, wrote more stories. None of those stories appear in here, thank God. And then when I graduated from grad school, I had heard that you make more money if you write a novel. And so I didn't want to write it. I was just so broke, and I was like, okay, if I can possibly sell something, I'll sell a novel. And I loved novels, and I wanted to try it. So I mushed 2 short stories together and called it a novel.
Wow.
Carried on.
Wow.
And then after that, I really just have written short stories between novels when I need a break from a novel. I have this novel called Father of the Rain that I wrote in real fits and starts. It was an incredibly emotional book to write. I really had to take long breaks, and I wrote several stories during that. I had this thing one time in about 2008 where I told myself I was going to write a short story every day. the novel writer, you know, like, I can toss off a short story today. And I did write, I think I wrote 2 in 2 weeks. So, and they're both in here. And I won't tell you which ones, because I don't want you to. And I think that's it. And I had this idea when I did this. I did a 2-book deal with Writers and Lovers and a collection of short stories. And I had the idea that I would, you know, that I'd write like 5 or 6 more short stories at least for the collection. And then COVID hit.
Wow.
So,
but you already had.
I already had.
Yeah. So I have a follow-up question before. 2 things that I bookmarked while you were talking. One was, I just wanted to say, like, I had similarly in high school, I think freshman year English teacher, we did something creative, and she wrote Lit Mag on my paper in big letters. And it's like, thank God for those high school teachers. Oh my God, who are like, you know. The other thing is that I would read the hell out of a Lily King Partridge Family book. I'm just saying, that would be really fun.
I would take that for you.
But my follow-up is, so if we look at this, what are some of the, if you can look at this, what are some of the oldest stories in here? What were some of the newest? And how far back do these go?
I know, so South, I think, is the oldest. And I want to say that I think I wrote that right after The Pleasing Hour.
Okay.
Possibly during The Pleasing Hour, but I don't think so. It's a little vague. So sometime around the late 90s.
Really?
It's starting to sound like a really long time ago.
Wow, it is. It kind of is. I mean, we've had, it's only been, it's 1 20-year decade since the 90s that we just went through. So that's about 10 years ago. So, okay.
Yeah. then I think the newest is either Creature or Timeline. I feel like I was writing those kind of at the same time.
Yeah, it's funny because you say these, I'm very bad at remembering which titles go with which stories, and so I'm always having to look up like, which one?
I know Timeline's the one that's set in
Yeah.
Vermont.
Yeah, which I live a quarter of the year in Vermont. And
Oh, I didn't know.
obviously you spent time in Vermont from this story.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
you knew what you were talking about with Burlington and the Hall.
yeah.
Have you lived there or was
Yeah,
that?
I was there briefly.
Yeah.
For like 3 months one time.
Yeah.
And then my brother has lived there for many years. Not now, but for years. And so I used to go back and visit it all the time.
You got it, because sometimes when people write about Vermont, it's just like there's a picturesque inn by the side of the road, and it's a little too easy in this, when you read something from someone who really knows a place, you can tell. So basically anyone who's been following my social media leading up to this event knows that I am obsessed with The Man at the Door, which is the last story in the collection. And we were going to see maybe if you could read a tiny bit of it.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to do that before I grill you with questions?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Sorry, I have to get this. Okay, I think I'm going to start at the beginning just because it's the easiest place, and I'll just read it a little bit. There were 2 of them in the basement already, unfinished, the pages hidden in a cabinet behind the cans of paint and stain. This one was her 3rd attempt. Last fall, she'd been on a binge, filling 2 notebooks on weekdays during the baby's morning nap, while her husband and 2 older children were scattered at their own desks miles away. But now that it was winter, a familiar torpor had set in. For weeks, she'd written nothing, though she couldn't break the horrid compulsion to sit there and wait. This morning, however, without warning, a sentence rose, a strange, unexpected change of words, meeting the surface in one long, gorgeous arc. As she hurried to get it down, she could feel the pressure of new words, 2 separate sentences vying for a place next to the first, and then more ideas splitting off from each other. Splitting off from each of those, and where there had been for so long now arid vacuity, there was fertile green ground, and any path she chose would be the right one. Words flooded her, and her hand ached to keep up with them. And above it all, her mind was singing, here it is, and she was smiling. The baby bleated through the monitor. She'd only managed to get 3 sentences on the page. He was not the good kind of baby who cried out and then, sensing that no one was going to come running, rolled over and fell back asleep. The crying would swiftly build to a crescendo of outrage and reproach that would wipe out all hope of another sentence. She stomped up the stairs to his doorway. What baby takes a 6.5-minute nap? He pulled himself up, pressed his teeth into the coated crib railing, and began to sway fetchingly, grinning all the while at the cleavage within the V of her bathrobe. Don't you get it? I need you to sleep. He whimpered at the ugly sound she was making. Her only choice was to nurse him back to sleep while she worked. She hoisted him out, squeezing him hard at his armpits. He studied her face uneasily. She carried him to her spot at the kitchen table, latched him on, and reread the 3 sentences. How quickly they flattened, lost their music. For those few words, she had been rough with her son. Her eyes passed over the page again. Awful. She felt like driving the pencil through her skin. The baby sucked, his eyes shut for the long pulls and open for swallowing, unseeing the whole time. The strong tugs at her breast returned her to a more familiar self. She pressed her lips to the fuzz at his hairline and nibbled. These animal moments of motherhood obliterated everything else briefly. So I'll stop there.
Yeah.
But I didn't get to the man at the door.
Right.
But there's a man at the door.
Well, the story turns surreal. That word is sort of inadequate, but I'm going to say surreal very quickly.
Yeah.
Can I say that kind of like the main basically shows up with a finished copy of the book she was writing.
Yeah.
And then he has notes on it.
And he says he's from the publishing house.
Right. So it's like, is this a visitor from the future? What is this? I think that I've been seeing an interesting slew of books recently that I think I can trace sort of genetically back to a while back to like Doris Lessing's The Fifth Child, but books like Helen Phillips, what was it called? Need, thank you. and a few others in the past year where it's Late Bitch, the Rachel Yoder this year. You basically embracing the surreal aspects of motherhood. The just absolutely, what is happening to my body, what's happening to my brain, kind of trippiness of it all.
Interesting.
Some of them are also dealing with that balance between motherhood and art. So Rachel Yoder is doing that. Clairvae Watkins, I was just mentioning, her very interesting, strange new book, does something similar. It's very autofiction. And this seems to do that. I think it's without, it doesn't need to be in conversation with those. You don't need to have read them to be, like partaking in the same moment. But it's interesting because I don't know that I've seen it like this in short story form, in this kind of distilled, and it made me, I think because of the short form and the idea that it was building to something very quickly, it made me very uneasy in a delightful way. Can you talk a little bit about where you were in your life when you wrote this?
I was right there.
Okay.
It's really funny because I usually if I use anything fictionally, it usually happened 20 years ago. I don't write about my life now. I have 2 kids who are 21 and almost 23. And I've never written anything about being a mother with teenager. I guess maybe in here, but kind of way before my kids were teenagers or anything. I'm just delayed. And if I lived somewhere, I lived in Spain for 2 years in the 90s, I still haven't written about it. It takes me a long time. But this, I really feel like was a product of 4 years of sleeplessness. It was kind of written in some sort of feverish thing. I had already, published. Actually, when I wrote it, I think I'd only published 1 book, and I had, a baby and a toddler, and I was just questioning everything. How was I going to do this? Like, how was I possibly going to be a good mother and a writer? It just didn't. For those particular years, or it's just very, very hard. When they go to school, you're like, okay, But and it's interesting. That was my premise is, just somebody trying to write and some dude comes to the door, and why, and then he became to just take on so much. I had no idea, I had all of that stuff in me, in some ways, I can look back at it now and I was like, oh, well, he represents the patriarchy and all its kaleidoscope,
because he keeps changing throughout the story. He looks different.
But he's always a he, and he always has super strong opinions. And she has to figure out what she's going to take from him and what she's not. It's such a, so you must have written this then in the early aughts. Is that is it strange to be, I found it was strange and not strange when my collection came out and there were these stories. I'm like, I wrote this when I was 22. But what's that experience like talking about this work that you're having to reach way back? I'm sure you edited them again. I did. With a fresh eye. And some a little more heavily than others. But this one had been published in the Harvard Review, and so I really didn't, and it had been edited really nicely by the editor there, and so we didn't really do anything for that. It is weird. I feel a little embarrassed, weirdly, like, oh, really? You didn't write anything new, so you're trotting out this old story, but people haven't read it except for people who get the Harvard Review, which I'm sure. But it is funny though, and I wonder if this happens to you. I really vividly remember exactly how it felt to write that story. I remember exactly where I was and practically what I was wearing and what my monitor looked like for the baby, who I was trying to get to sleep. And and I really do think it was triggered by somebody coming to the door.
Wow, that's incredible. There's something, I think with the story collection, there's something that makes you stop and take stock of your own evolution as a writer too, to look back and sure that you've written, I would imagine you just said, like, you've written more stories than this, whether or not they were published, there are more stories out there, right? That question of what to include and the question of, do you include something that maybe you can recognize as being good at what it's doing, but isn't where you are anymore,
Yeah.
right? And we would never know reading the book
Right.
which ones those are, right? Because the author's relationship to the story is completely
Right, no, it's
beside
very
the point.
true.
Can you talk a little bit about what, I know in putting together a collection, there are these things that I think as a reader you wouldn't think about, but just the amount that we sweat over the order of stories, right? And exactly which ones to include. And can you talk about that process a little bit? And also, as it might have related to anything that you realized as you did that about the distance you've come as a writer, that kind of, is there that embarrassment, something simply because you were younger?
Yeah.
Not the like what someone would think about as an old story, but just that like, I'm allergic to this because I wrote this when I was so young,
Right. Yeah, no, the order was really interesting because you kind of have to try to tell some sort of story with the stories.
Like an album.
Yeah, and I mean, they were written in such different times in my life in some ways that it felt strange to kind of see, okay, how are they communicating with each other? I think for and then you have to, there are a few adolescent stories, right? And you don't want them all to be together.
Right.
And then there are 4, I think, that are narrated by men. And so you don't want those all to be together. And
there are several that are in mansions or vacation, like hotels.
Right.
Kind of that, right? They're,
It just makes so much sense because I swear every single dream I have, I've just realized they never take place at home. They always take place in a hotel. I'm not in hotels very much, but I'm always somewhere else. Do you have that with
I do. I have my dream life is wild.
We're gonna have to talk about that. I'm kind of starting to be, I think with COVID, we're all thinking about our dreams a little bit more than we used to. Yeah, they're kind of freaking me out. But so Creature and Timeline and Man at the Door all have narrators who eventually become writers. And that was another thing that kept on coming up. And so I kind of see those stories as like the 3 pillars that are kind of holding up the whole collection. And they're chronological. Like a Creature, she's 14. And so, she's not actually a writer yet, but this is the moment. This is the moment this summer, these 2 weeks, when she becomes a writer, And then in Timeline, she sets up that desk, she screws in the legs and, she's in her 20s and she's just trying to figure it out.
The antsiness of the early,
Yeah. And then with Man at the Door, I mean, she still hasn't published, but she's getting closer. And she's not going to let this guy mess it up.
Right. It works really well for me that these are all really realist stories until that last one.
Yeah.
And I think if you planted the Man at the Door earlier in the collection, we'd be waiting for that surrealist note to recur.
Right. Yeah, no, it definitely felt like that had to be the last one. It just had, for so many reasons. I mean, first of all, it ends on the word end. Ending or something like that. Ending. You're fine ending. But okay, so this is what my editor and I thought, is that yes, they're all realistic. But Mansard, you enter with Mansard, which is the 3rd to last one. And there's a mystery there, that guy is, things are not as they seem, right? And then in South, there's a ghost story.
Right.
And so we're preparing the reader for the Man at the Door.
It makes a lot of sense, right? It's still the real world. It's someone telling a ghost story. Right. It's not a gray lady running around or something.
Exactly.
The suggestion of ghosts.
Yeah.
It works so well. I remember with my story collection, just the note cards where I had everything, age of main character, male, female, length of story, all those different elements, and then just the shuffling.
And what was your thought about that? Like,
I mean, it was interesting too, because my editor had slightly different thoughts. I was a little bit more interested in the overall shape of the collection, and she was a little more interested in because I wanted to leave out a story that had been well anthologized, and she was like, no, we got to put in the most successful stories, even if it doesn't really fit.
And did you, I mean, there's also, of course, like the biggest thing you're thinking about with a short story collection is you want to put one of the strongest stories first.
Right. Yep.
And then I always feel like the story collections that I know, it's strong, and then maybe weak, and then strong, and then weak, and then strong. Right.
Yeah. I don't know if you watch like Project Runway, but when they put together the collection, you see the whole, it is like you finish with your wedding dress, but you start with the like, I do this in the middle.
Right.
Yeah. Learned so much from Project Runway.
And then, but we had little kind of nicknames for the stories in some ways, like 5 Tuesdays in Winter was the crowd pleaser.
Okay.
We gotta put the crowd pleaser, up front,
Yeah.
but we didn't want to put it first. We didn't want to please people too.
Right, because then the rest of it, it's like, where's the
earnest?
Yeah.
Pleaser.
Yeah. So I actually did have a question about how that title ended up as the title of the full story collection.
Well, it's a sad tale.
Oh.
Because I really wanted Creature. I really wanted that. And my publishing house hated it.
Really?
And not only did they hate it, when I kept on pushing for it, they were happy to discover that there was a novel called Creatures that was published in January before this came out. And so last January. And my editor said that they would have to hire somebody full-time to take care of the glitches that would happen in all the databases when Creature and Creatures got mixed up. And
from the same press?
No, not from the same press.
Oh, okay, but like a bookstore ordering.
Yeah, so I was not allowed to do Creature. And the thing is, I had, my friend Jen Goldfinger is beautiful painter, and I had such the perfect painting for Creature. Perfect. But then the good news is, then that 5 Tuesdays, out of all of these 5 Tuesdays in Winter, was the only other title I liked for a title.
Yeah.
But then they started sending me like these kind of abstract, not very interesting covers.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, if we're going to do abstract, kind of colorful abstract, let's do the painting of my mother-in-law that hangs in my living room. And so this is like a detail of the corner of that
oh my God.
painting.
So it's a painting by her or of her?
By her.
By her.
Sorry,
Oh my God.
By her.
That's absolutely incredible.
And this is just a little piece of it. Yeah. But I was so psyched that worked out.
That is really cool. I mean, it works beautifully. Like, I think it's kind of on trend without being mistakable for anything else.
Yeah. I think it looks perfect too. And then I'm just gonna do some more promoting of my family members. My daughter did these drawings at the, right below all of the title, my daughter Kala. And then I just, I don't want them to feel left out, but Eloise did the author photo.
Your other
My
half, that
other
is
daughter.
amazing.
So there we go.
Oh my God, that's really cool.
I know. So I really love it as a physical object.
That's so cool. I love asking other authors, and not asking you this right now, but I love asking other authors about the rejected designs for their covers, because people sometimes have some hilariously bad ones that they still have on their phone. Like, can you believe?
The Euphoria ones were just
Really?
incredible. Yeah.
What did they
like a dock kind of into a swampy, lake with a typewriter at the end of it.
Oh.
Just a typewriter at the end of a dock, or like a dugout canoe with a typewriter at the end of it. So bizarre. It was so bizarre.
I guess that like water adjacent writing must have been easier in the age of the typewriter than it is now, right? Like there's not as much risk involved, but still not. No. Oh God. Yeah. And then you ended up with just the most.
I know we got so lucky.
Gorgeous. And it's a detail of a insect wing. Am I remembering that right, or something? No.
It's actually of a rainbow gum tree.
Okay, okay.
Like a, you know, the kind of bark, really
Yeah.
colorful bark.
Yeah.
That looks just like an abstract.
Amazing, amazing. Oh my God. So I'm gonna ask one more question myself, but what I would love for you guys to do is completely tune me out and start thinking of questions that you would like to ask. So that when I finish asking my space filler question, we can turn to the audience and you guys can ask their questions. So I'd asked earlier about sort of the you know, short story only version of your career. I'm curious, so, you know, Euphoria was for me like the moment that I heard of you. And I think that was probably true for a lot of people,
Yeah,
right?
it's
It
my
was just
debut novel.
Your debut, yeah.
Everybody says that.
Right. Oh God. You know, but it is that thing actually, honestly, like you start hearing it's like this book is everywhere. Damn, this debut novelist, you got it so easy, and then you look it up and it's like, oh, it was her 18th book. Never mind, never mind. It wasn't actually, it was your
I did the
third.
same thing with you.
Oh, that's really funny. Right. The other one, Emily St. John Mandel was the one I was like, damn her. And then I was like, she's been around the block. This is okay. I forgive her. It's all good. So, you know, short stories are tricky. And I've made my peace, and I'm talking about just in terms of audience, in terms of readership. I have made my peace with it in so many ways, partly just, you know, it's like the Oscars come on every year, and then there's the short film thing, and I'm like, I haven't seen any of these. I'm not gonna see any of these. I'm gonna go get a snack. God bless. You know, these are for the film buffs and the students of film and the filmmakers themselves. I'm in it for the feature film, and I think I get that that's how a lot of readers are with fiction. Although I would argue that if you miss short stories, you're missing not only emerging voices, but also the strangest, wildest experimentation that can be done with something that could not be sustained for 300 pages, right? So as I, you know, I adore them in the door. I don't think I want to read the 300-page version of that. It's perfect as it is, right? And it would strain its own bounds, right? And doing that, you'd have to make it in, you'd have to give them a backstory and the whole thing, and it can only exist in this way. What I'm going to ask though, I'm yammering long enough, they're all going to have questions now, hopefully they're what I want to ask is, you know, do you feel, you're in a great position in your career, you're coming off of 2 really big novels, in fact, you know, with the last one as well. Do you feel like this is the book that the real fans are going to read and the aspiring writers themselves? Do you feel like this is a book that is finding its way into the hands of people who haven't read many short story collections before because they followed you as a novelist, which can be kind of fun? Do you feel like this is just going to be kind of the grace note on the things that most people like? How are, you know, it's too early to really know, of course, right? Because this could win the Pulitzer and that, you know, changes it all. But you know, do you have a sense of where this book fits into the arc of your career, at least in terms of the public perception, in terms of how people read you?
I don't know. I mean, what you were saying earlier, I've definitely gotten the Lily King turns her hand to something new. You know,
and so in the 1990s, right?
And so in some ways, it's, you know, it is a little bit like, you know, well, you know, this is a part of me and has been a part of me for forever, and so it feels really good to have it out there, better than I realized. I didn't think that I needed to have this out there, but I mean, you know, obviously there's some part of me that did, but it feels really good, especially to have the ones that weren't published in magazines to be actually out off my computer. I mean, there's part of it, it's just like, I'm just so glad it's off those files.
You spend so much time on something, and that's just, or even if it has been published, if it didn't get anthologized or it's not living online, it just had that moment of a few hundred people reading it.
And also, I just loved short story collections, as I'm sure you did too, so passionately when I was starting to write. I mean, so passionately. And so in that way, it just feels nice to be part of that, you know, to have something that is part of those collections that that were so important to me.
Yeah.
I don't really know in terms of, I don't have a sense yet, and we're also disconnected. I haven't done very many in-person things, and but I have gotten a couple of emails from people saying, I hadn't heard of you before 5 Tuesdays in Winter.
Ooh.
And I was like, well, I like that.
Okay.
I don't know how it's reached you. That's great, you know?
They get some short stories only newsletter or something.
Exactly.
That's
So
I
I hope
love
there are
those
more
people.
like that.
Who are they? That's amazing. It's incredible. All right, so I'm hoping that at this point we have some questions from the audience, and certainly they could be about previous books if you want to do that, but about this one as well. And you don't need to have sure, and you don't need to have read this book to ask a question. It's not English class. Just always want to make sure people understand that. So we just need someone to go first. That's always the main thing. It's getting someone to go first. There we go.
Can you talk about the love triangle in Euphoria and how you said it in such a different time of mores that we're not aware, but it's so sensitive? How did you get in their heads, all 3 of them?
How did I get in their heads in the love triangle of Euphoria? I mean, it took me a little while to kind of get in there. What I often do when I'm a little stuck in it, and with them I was a little stuck for a while because I had gone in thinking that I would write from Nell Stone's perspective, and that I would keep Nell keep her life kind of adhering as well as I could to Margaret Mead. And that lasted for about 6 pages. And then I couldn't do it. It didn't, she wasn't the right vehicle for me to tell that story. And I didn't figure it out until I wrote the 2nd chapter. And that, I was just kind of experimenting with that, getting into Andrew Bankson's head. I just wanted to know what was going on in his mind because I knew he was having a crisis, but I just needed to be in his head. And it was a little bit of an exercise. But once I was there, I was so comfortable there in a way that I was not comfortable with Nell. And so then I thought I would tell it from all 3. I would alternate chapters, and I tried that for a while. But what I did, which is what I do sometimes when I'm not reaching the characters, I write their autobiography that doesn't show up in the book. But
like a dossier.
And I always write by hand. But the autobiography I write on the computer.
Ooh.
And I always started, I was born. And so it goes in, you're in their head, you're in their voice.
Yeah.
And I did that for Nell and for Fenn and for Bankson. And I drew, once I had that, then I kind of plucked things from that autobiography. And that's how I feel like I got to know them and got to figure out how they would interact and how they would conflict and what would be the sore points and what Nell would fall in love with, and you know, his vulnerability versus Fenn's, you know, complete, you know, mask and barrier that he put up to her. And I just figured out a lot that way is how I did it. And many drafts, you know, many drafts.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Over here.
I have a question. I discovered you with Father of the Rain, which I think is a perfect novel.
Oh, thank you.
Can you talk about periods of time when you're not writing and how that feels emotionally, and what you do to refill so that you would get back to the page, teaming with ideas and stories?
Yeah. Thank you. That is a those breaks and when you're not writing. I feel like I'm going through a not writing phase right now, as I always am when I'm kind of on the road talking about a book. And they are frustrating times, and they are kind of a little low emotionally because I'm not, you know, engaged with this project that I'm really, and not always excited about, but I'm engaged, you know, and I'm in, like it or not. And with Father of the Rain, you know, as I said, it was a really hard book to write, really emotional. And it did bring me low, and I had little kids and I couldn't go that low. And so I would just have to stop. And I learned it during that book, and also with the help of a therapist, to take breaks and to replenish. and not feel guilty about it, to know that it's part of the process. And this idea of replenishing was something that my therapist came up with, that really helped me. And she asked me, what replenishes you, and then for me, it's reading, it's exercise, it's, I don't know, train rides, driving, showers, all those things kind of stir up my creative juices, and particularly not reading at night, which is what I often do, but reading in the morning with a cup of tea, really actively with a notebook and a pen in my hand. And that's very replenishing for me for some reason. It just, it gets me going. And writing those short stories really helped me too. I feel like both Timeline and Creature, I wrote those when I was, before I wrote Writers and Lovers, and kind of after one idea had gone bad, and I just couldn't go back to that. And I was kind of in this limbo land. And I wrote those two stories, both of which, had writers in them. And I feel like I was kind of practicing for Writers and Lovers in some ways. I didn't know it, but I think short stories help me kind of play around with things that are in there and get them out. And so that maybe something bigger can come up afterwards. So I think that's another way, Anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I mean, I think the danger for me of working only on a novel is that every idea I have, I try to put into the novel.
Yeah.
I'm like, I think of a great funny restaurant name. It's like, it's gotta go in the novel.
Exactly.
And
And usually, a novel, there's so much room in a novel.
Yeah.
Usually you can put it all in.
sure, yeah, whether you should or not.
Exactly.
Right?
No, it is funny in that way.
Yeah, no, and so it's like having another pot on the stove, some place to put other ideas, but then also
Yeah.
just some fresh source of
Yes.
something life. Yeah, it's very helpful.
Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah. We have one over here.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to ask, when you have your early drafts of the work, do you share them with friends or family and input or feedback? Or do you not really want to hear what they have to say?
Yeah. So she's asking about early drafts and if I share them with friends and family. I don't share early drafts. I do have a writers group, and we have something that we call airings. And so when if somebody's in the middle, we're often all in the middle of writing a novel. And we have a thing where you can read, say 3 pages, really not much more than 3 pages. If we're having a meeting, we each go around and we air something. And so everybody reads 3 pages, and all the other people are allowed to say about that thing you read is, that was very nice. That's it. No feedback. Like when I'm writing early drafts, I don't want any feedback. There are other people who really like to work that way and want to know, well, is this working? Is what's working? I feel like I show my final draft, when I can't do anything else, then I want other people to help me out. But if there's something I can change, I don't want to, when I hear if I hand in something for someone to read and critique and it's too early, it's like, oh, I know that. I want to get to a point where I don't know anything, and I really need to hear how other people are seeing it and get a different perspective. That's when it's really helpful for me. Yeah. Do you do that, or do you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you met earlier a couple of members of my writing group, which is
Yes.
really fun. One thing that I've realized for me, I have learned to save my husband's read for when I am not going to be a monster, whatever he says to me.
Yes.
Like when I'm like it's pretty solid. Also because he's not a writer. And then I think it's really, the kind of feedback you get from readers is really different than the kind of feedback you get from writers.
Right.
Early on, he was what I had, and he would, come up with some interesting, but not the stuff about structure, and wouldn't intuitively know what kind of feedback I needed at that point in time, like line editing sentences. when that wasn't where I was.
Yeah.
But it's tricky. I mean, I teach a lot of novelists who are often working on their first novel, and I always warn them. So it's a year-long novel class that goes from August to June. And every year, right around this time, I have to give them a really stern warning that if they're going home for the holidays, they should not talk to their family about what they're writing. Because I've had way too many writers come back in January being like, well, I just don't feel like I should do this anymore because my sister said this really mean thing about it. Like my mom said, why would you want to write about something so depressing? And I think she has a point. Oh my God, don't, you gotta really have your filters on, or make up. I was also tell them like make up something else that's not your novel. Be like, I'm writing about a nun who fights crime and she can fly. And whatever they say about it can't hurt you.
That's very good, very, very good advice.
Yeah.
I have a friend whose husband always says after reading the draft, so who's your audience? Like who do you think would want to read this?
Oh my God.
Yeah, no.
Millions of
Do not give him your novel.
Oh God, that's horrible. What other questions do we have out there? Yeah.
I'm wondering what your daily writing process is, and has it changed at all during COVID, and what tools or coping mechanisms if you have used, if any?
So she's asking my daily writing process and has it changed during COVID and what tools. It's, when you're not writing, you just feel like such a fraud. It's all so hypothetical.
Yeah.
But when it's happening, which I hope it will happen next week or even this week, I kind of got in the habit once my kids went to school. Now they're grown, but of writing like at 9. I used to write at 6 or 5:30 in the morning or something, and now I'm much more kind of a banker's hours 9 to 3 sort of person, and I have to write on a full stomach, and I have to have a cup of really strong tea, and I have to have a spiral notebook that is very thinly lined with a pencil that is mechanical, and usually made out of plastic. I'm embarrassed to say, but I replenish the lead, and so I'm always buying plastic pencils. And I always have Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse and Shirley Hazard's The Evening of the Holiday, a copy of those 2 books on my desk. I'm really messy, and so there's a lot of other crap on my desk too. I'd really like it not to be there, but it builds so quickly. And then I just I write in the spiral notebook, and I wish I had it with me, but with the short stories I don't. But I always keep notes in the back, and I keep a little writing log on the very last page, which I just write the date and how much I wrote in the notebook, like 4.5 pages or 3.5. For me, like a half page, perfectly decent day. I don't like put the pressure on myself to write a certain word count. I just try to show up, and I try so hard to keep everything else, out of that writing time, no doctor's appointments, no interviews, no anything, I think it's really hard to project that space, and no matter how well you know people and how long you've known them and how they know your career, they still, oh, can you do that at 10:30? No, I've been telling you for 20 years I can't do that at 10:30.
Wow.
But and so
I need to be better about that, man.
Yeah.
I mean, as the writer, not as the imposer. Yeah. Well, I have so little in common with that, because I'm kind of allergic to routine, and I kind of, I like to write in different places and different times, but I do have sort of osmosis books, and it changes for the books that are just on my desk, and it changes based on what I'm writing. Usually just things that I feel like I want this to infuse the book. Sometimes it's something I was using for research, but I swear there's something magical about just having it on your desk. it soaks into the desk and it comes out through your computer.
No, it's so true. And also if you have a moment of, you sit down and you're like, what am I doing? And why am I doing it? I'll just reach for one of those books and I open up the page no matter where it is. And I'm like, okay, that's why I do this.
Yeah,
You know,
wow.
wow, boom. And then I just try to summon the, you know.
Yeah, summon the ghost of Virginia Woolf. and-
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
That's amazing. Yeah, in the front.
So I would love to hear, I read Refugees Witch, I love it so
Oh,
so
thank
much, and
you.
every resource as well.
Thank you.
And so I'd love to know, since I don't have another really king book lined up at this exact moment, what you're reading, what you've read recently that you love, and I'd love to hear from you too.
Sure, yeah.
Let's see, most recently, I read Oh, William by Elizabeth Strout.
Was it great?
So good. I mean, my name, another book that I have on my desk is, My Name's Lucy Barton. I just, a lot of people are nodding right now. I just love that book so much. I think it is an absolute work of genius. I cannot read it enough. And that is another one I could just any page, it just, you know, gives me that feeling. And so it was so great to return to Lucy, who narrates that book. Have you read it?
I've read Lucy Barton, as possible.
Oh, okay.
It was at home.
Okay, well, you're gonna love it. You're gonna love it, and you're gonna be so sad at how quickly you're gonna read that book. Because it just flies by. I really, really loved it. I also just read Ann Patchett has that brand new collection of essays called These Precious Days. So good. So good. Also just went too fast. So those are my two latest.
I'm in a bind always because although I'm allowed to do events, I'm judging the Penn Faulkner this year, and so I'm not in a good position to be like, my favorite novel of the year was.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a couple of memoirs instead. So I got into, like, I've really enjoyed a few memoirs this year that have been my break from all of that, because it doesn't count for the Penn Faulkner. Blind Man's Bluff by James Tate Hill. He's a writer who went mostly almost completely blind in adolescence, and it's just a beautiful memoir. Everything I Have Is Yours by Eleanor Henderson, which is about a very unconventional, uncomfortable marriage. I don't know how I felt about the topic, but it was really, I had things I wished that I could tell the author, but I thought it was a really beautiful book. Gina Frangelo, who's here in Chicago, has a memoir called Blow Your House Down that came out this year about basically blowing up her marriage. Just stunning, and I know they have copies downstairs. And then I also know they have copies downstairs of Charles Finch, who used to live in Chicago, had a memoir just come out a couple of years ago called What Just Happened. And it sounds like the kind of thing you would not want to read, but I promise you do. It's a diary of last year. And just all the politics and the COVID stuff. And I know that sounds like the last thing you'd want to read, but it's so cathartic and it's really funny.
Wow.
So 4 memoirs that I strongly recommend,
great.
and I won't say anything about any fiction. Any other questions? One last good one, or I can just we can do a lightning round up here otherwise. We should do a lightning round.
Okay.
Let's do a lightning round. Okay. So just like either or, cats or dogs? Dogs. Okay, correct answer. Chicago or New York?
I barely know Chicago.
I know, it's
All right,
fun.
Chicago.
Winter or summer?
Summer.
Okay, spring or fall?
Fall.
Yeah, correct, but why?
Mood.
Yeah.
Mood, just richness and,
Yeah.
you know, all the kind of just nostalgia.
Yeah.
I don't know. I love spring.
Yeah.
It's a crowd pleaser. You know?
Right. It's a little easy.
Fall,
It's a little
has
easy.
all the emotions.
Yeah.
And you also feel like writing in the fall.
Yeah, no, you do, definitely. Okay, Saturday or Sunday?
God, that is hard.
Yeah, it is, right?
Sunday.
Okay, just any reason, just. I think there's less to do usually.
Yeah, I feel a little better about just reading on the couch all day. All
Yeah.
afternoon long.
Yeah, you don't feel weird if it's 8 PM in your home.
Yeah.
You don't feel some residual, like, everyone else is doing some kind of, yeah.
And I also feel like I've gotten outside on Saturdays. I really have to go outside. So.
Yeah.
So this is spoken by somebody who lives in Maine, but I have to go out there.
Since you're in Maine, Vermont or New Hampshire?
Vermont.
Vermont, yeah, correct answer.
Like
It's a much better state.
1,000
It's a
times
much
Vermont.
better state. It's got better politics. It's
Yeah.
prettier. Yeah, it's got better food. It's gonna be, yeah, it's pretty much better everything. And finally, we'll go with
The Rolling Stones and the Beatles, right?
sure, but I was gonna ask you something else.
Okay.
Well, just but
No,
go
how
for
are
it.
you? Rolling Stones and Beatles.
Oh, Beatles.
Beatles, me too.
Yeah. Poetry or plays? If you're gonna read plays, it's not. Yeah.
Love plays
Me too.
so much.
Do you have a favorite right now, or favorite playwright, or just kind of?
Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's so much that I've definitely learned so much as a fiction writer from studying plays and studying with playwrights and
Have you ever written one?
yeah, in college, in grad school, and then
Wow.
there's a certain point when the playwrights all go off with the theater people,
Yeah.
and the fiction writers and the poets who have nothing in, not nothing in common, but like have less in common, right, are shunted off together. And the playwrights, it's like you missed that train and they're off. It's a very
So true.
specific industry.
So true.
And I was always going to be a playwright. And then, they were just off and getting these special grants and working in theaters, and you never see them again.
Yeah.
Maybe one day.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know. Wouldn't you love to do that? Did you
Yeah.
produce any of them?
I mean, in college, yeah, in college.
That must have been such an amazing feeling.
Right, no, absolutely, to see, like,
Yeah.
and it's exciting enough when you get like an audiobook actor, or when you see like the French cover of your novel or something, like
Right.
someone made a thing based on a
Right,
thing that I
right,
made, that's
right.
incredible. But actually, if you saw it, yeah. Are any of your books being filmed as anything, or is?
So Writers and Lovers was actually sold, not just optioned, but
Actually, that's sold, okay.
to Tony Collette, who's going to direct it.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Hollywood is so weird, but
Exactly.
yeah.
And then Euphoria has been optioned twice by the BBC, and they are not calling me. So
Yeah, it is so funny because you get this like, people hear like your book has been optioned and they're like, oh my God, when's it coming out? It's gonna start. Like, ooh, this is a baby step down a very long, weird road.
yeah,
But,
exactly. What about you? Is there-
Optioned, but not further than that. So
Yeah.
who knows? I'm just holding out. There's part of me that wants any film thing to fail so that we can go Broadway musical instead. That would make me really happy, so. Anyway, we want to give a huge thanks to Exile and Bookville for making a live in-person event. They're selling books back there, and we're both happy to sign. They have a lot more books downstairs that are for sale, and I believe you're going to be open again after this, right on the second floor. And I was talking to
beautiful store.
Yeah, I know at least a couple of people came up straight up here and did not stop and have never seen the store before. And you really want to see it. It's absolutely gorgeous. And then eventually they won't let you live there, I've discovered. Anyway, thank you. Thank you Lily, so much.
Thank you so much for that.
Thanks everyone so much for coming out tonight, and for everyone tuning in out there in virtual world. And thank you, Lily, and thank you, Rebecca, for today's conversation. It was going to be a great pairing. So weird thing, the lights won't turn back on. So we're going to move the signing table onto the stage.
Oh, fine.
And we're going to move the sale table closer to some lights so you can see what you're buying. Yeah, I know. It's a small building.
It is.
But give us 1 second to get everything ready, and then we'll start having people come up to have their books signed.
Yeah, I have to.